Okay, now we are done with the basic operations of strings. We're going to now move forward to advanced operations since we are going to use them when writing ethical hacking tools. So I'm going to use another notebook as usual. I'm going to close this and create a new notebook called Advanced Strings. If you please, you can continue with the previous one, of course. I'm going to zoom in a little bit and I'm going to change the name to strings advanced for this operation. Okay, so I'm going to rename this and let's start. First, I'm going to create a variable called myString and it will be equal to hello world as usual. So we have learned to call the strings, like I can call my string and it will give me the output of hello world. But we didn't learn how to get a single element out of my string, a single letter. Okay, so let me write this as a note. So I'm choosing markdown. I'm putting two hashes here to specify that I'm going to use this as a heading, and I will say indexing. Okay, so what is indexing and how can we use it? So if I write my string and open a parenthesis but a square one, not a regular parenthesis, okay, not a curly parenthesis but a square one, and after that if you write 0 for instance and hit shift enter, it will give you the first letter. So why first letter? Because indexes start with 0 in strings, and indexes generally start with 0. We're going to learn something called lists. Maybe you have heard them as arrays in other programming languages, but in Python we call it lists, and indexes always start at 0. So suppose you want to get O out of hello. How do you get it? I suggest you pause here and try to get the O yourself. I hope you managed to get it. Since O is the fifth element, I will just say 4 and it will give me O. Why? Because index starts at 0 and index 4 is equal to the fifth element, which is O. Okay, so I hope you get the general idea. You can use indexes to get individual elements out of a string. So suppose you want to get the last element rather than the first element. What do you do then? You may write -1 in here, okay? And -1 means the last element. Of course, if you try to just get the -2, it will give you the second last element of that string, which is L. So it is pretty useful when you want to get the last letter of a word, last letter of a sentence. I don't know, we will use them when writing ethical hacking tools. So we have more complex methods than this, surely, and let's see about them. We want to know something called slicing, okay? So there comes a time when we need to get a specific portion of that indexes, like we want to get the elements between 2 and 5, or up to 5, or from 5. What do we do then? We need to know a concept called slicing. Let me create another string called myString2 and give it 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, for example. And please pay attention that I'm surrounding this into double quotes, because if I written it like this, it means that it's an integer, but I'm not gonna work with integer, I'm going to work with a string, so I'm surrounding it with double quotes. So this is our string. Now, if I write something like this, what will I get? The first element of that string is 1, right? So it's pretty clear, I think, right now. But what if I want to get a certain proportion of that string? I would have then used this colon sign and say 2, for example. Let's hit Shift Enter and let's see the results. What we get here is that 3, 4, 5, 7, and so on. So what does it do? It just omits the first 2 elements of that string. Okay, it starts with the second index. So it just omits the 0 index, first index, which is 1 and 2, and starts with the 3. So this is called slicing. Okay, actually, let's delete this because these irregulars are not a markdown cell. Let me write it down as a note. So I'm choosing markdown. I'm going here to specify this will be a heading with hashes and say this is slicing. So let's move on. So what do I mean by slicing? I can specify which index I'm going to stop or start with slicing, with using colon, of course, like we did in this example. So what if I want to just get 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10? So I can write my string with colon, of course, and I want to omit index 0, first, second, third. Okay, so I will just start with 4, and it will start with the 4th index. So I will have 5, 6, 7, and so on. So the first number before the colon specifies the starting index. And if I type something like this, my string 2 and 2 after the colon, it means a stopping index, and it says that stop at index 2. So it just gives out the 1 and 2, the index 0 and the index first. Okay, so you might think that when we specify the 4th here, it just included the 4th index, and when we specified the 2nd here, it just didn't include the 2nd index. And that is exactly what Python is trying to do actually. It doesn't want any intersection. So the first one is starting index, it includes the 4th, and second one is the stopping index, and it doesn't include the stopping index. So I can get the first part of a string in a separate way and the second part in a string in another way. Okay, so let's write it down. Okay, with a hash again, it's a stopping index. So if I write down my string second, 4th this time, I would have get what's left of this 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 0. So I can get 1, 2, 3, 4. So this is the logic behind including one index in one method and not including it in another index. Okay, so is it possible to use them both in the same line? Of course. When I type 2 colon 4, it means that start with the 2nd index and stop at 4th index. So it will start with the 3 and it will stop at 5, right? So let's hit Shift Enter and it will tell us 3, 4, and it will stop at 5 but not include 5, so we will get 3 and 4. So we can get middle of a string, we can get the top and bottom of a string we can get starting point, ending point, middle point, some portion with using slicing techniques. So always remember that the first one is the starting index, but second one is actually a stopping index. So what if you want to get something like 6, 7, 8 as a number? So pause the video here and try to get it yourself. If you did get it, very good. If you didn't, you should have written 5 to 8. Because why? So the fifth index is actually the 6, and it starts with the starting index, and the 8 index is 9. It won't include the 8 index, so we will get out as 6, 7, 8. So this is how you work with slicing. But we're not done yet. We have something called step size. Okay, let me write it down for you, and it will specify how many sizes that we are going to skip when we are working with slicing. What do I mean with it? Let's write down our myString2, and if I type 2 columns this time and hit Shift Enter, it will give me my string as it is, because I didn't specify any starting, stopping index, and the last part before we close the parentheses is actually the stepping size, and we didn't specify any stepping size either. So what if I did? So let's see an example. Let's say colon, colon, and for example 3. So it will just skip 3 steps when it gives out the output. So we get 1 and we just skip to the third index, okay, after 1. So we omit 2 indexes in the middle. So we can for example, we can say myString colon colon 2, and we only get these odd numbers, for example. You're going to find this very useful when you deal with complex set of strings, and you can combine all of these methods into one single line. What do I mean? You can say start with second, stop at fourth, and step size is actually 2. So it will give you only the 3. So it turns out that only 3 fits in with our current filtering. Of course, you may want to do some other complex examples as well. I really suggest you guys to just work around with this, play around with this, and the final trick is using -1 as step size. If you use -1 as step size, what will happen? It will just reverse the string. Okay, so this is pretty useful. When you want to reverse a string, you can just give the -1 as a step size. -1 doesn't make sense to use as a step size, but this is a trick in Python that we use. So we're done with the strings here. Let's move to the next lectures where we will learn other data structures as well.